So here we go. New Harmony.
Indeed, thank you. In the chat, while you were sharing with us, a couple of people had asked if they could have permission to record this for people who couldn't make it. I don't see why not. I mean, I don't think that we've talked about that or had a policy, but I do realize that these are important discussions that we are having. And I almost feel really, maybe, is it just asking everybody who's here if that's okay? Because we're all speaking and creating a safe space to speak our truth. So I think it's fine. I think probably the committee thinks it's fine. And so maybe that's what we're going to do. All right. So if everybody could be clear that we are recording now as we speak our truth to power. So thank you for that, Jane. And I think part of the thing that we wanted Jane to speak about Minneapolis is because we worked on this workbook and we published it in 2019. And when we published it in 2019, there was no pandemic, and America was not. Sometimes I just feel like right now we're just on fire, that the country's in flames or something like that. And so it's a very different atmosphere that we find ourselves in as we're talking about the workbook this evening, although a lot of what the workbook is about does not change. You know, so I think it was right trying to have a balance of how to be in the real world with everything that's happening now, but then also sticking to the workbook. And part of the reason that we're talking about the workbook is because, as many of you know, because of the pandemic, we will not be able to have festival this year, and because we're not sure how that's going to play out for the rest of the year in terms of other gatherings that we normally have. And so the New Harmony Task Force was then saying, well, if we're not going to be able to see each other in July and have our standard workshops that we would have where we'd all be in a room together, what's the best way for us to get our work done? And so we thought it would be good for us to start scheduling these talks, these community conversations that we're having on different topics that we will do throughout the summer. The workbook came up because we had written it and we loved it, and we thought everybody had read it and just knew what it was about. And then every so often we're surprised that people are like, what workbook? And so we thought, okay, maybe then this is a good place for us to start in terms of the workbook and talking about it and presenting it a couple of times. And so I just want to set up how the workbook happened, and then I'm going to trade off with my colleagues, William and Reed, about talking about different aspects of the book. And then we're going to open it up to a wider conversation where the rest of the task force committee members will introduce themselves, and then we will go from there. So the way that it was that in 2012 at Festival, there was a chorus member named Travis Ballard who sent a note to Gala choruses after Festival and thanked them, said that it was a great festival and that he certainly had felt welcome as a Black man at Festival, obviously within his own chorus, but as he went through the few days of the conference, he started to feel like he was a guest at somebody else's party because he did not see himself represented in concert blocks, on the concert stages. He did not see himself represented in workshops or the other presentations that were going on. And so it was, as I speak for him, even though he's not here, it probably was a combination of having like this really amazing, enriching experience at first that by the time he left probably felt a little bit hollow. So he sent that note. And Gala Choruses took that very seriously. And what formed was an open table, a series of discussions, a committee formed that started talking about equity, access, and inclusion in Gala. And in the beginning, I think a lot using the word diversity. By the time I came onto the committee, I wasn't there in the very beginning. By the time I came on a couple of years later, it was starting to form as in, what are we going to do with these conversations? We're talking about these things. How can we take what we're talking about and starting to understand so clearly and communicate it to everybody else? And it said, well, then we will develop a workbook. And it was specifically a workbook because we wanted to make sure that we were not dictating to people how they did this work. Like what we wanted to do was have a guide. So we could create scenarios that people could follow, but then they would actually be doing the work themselves within their own courses. And the first thing that we agreed on was that we had to do away with the word diversity in this work because diversity had started to be overused. It had become a catchphrase, and it was almost like somebody could check it off on their book. They said, well, I've fixed my issues of diversity. There's nothing more for me to do. And it actually felt more powerful to us that we were talking about equity, access, and belonging. These were the things that we were talking about in courses, and that they were the type of issues that affected everybody on different levels. Whereas diversity, not only was it too narrow in terms of people thinking that they had done all that they needed to do, but often when you would say diversity, people thought that you were particularly talking about issues of race, and it actually was broader than that. So those were the discussions that took place, and we worked on the workbook, and that's some of what we're going to be talking about this evening. So, William, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. So if you are new to the New Harmony workbook, you can get a copy for yourself, or rather you can view it online right this moment. It is free and available. If you do want a printable copy, that is possible. We just ask that you reach out to Robin or somebody using the Contact Gala Choruses link that's there on the page, because we just like to track how the book is getting used. We're not trying to spy on anybody. We just like knowing who it's being used by and how, so that we can best provide those kinds of services. So maybe we want to take just a couple of minutes. Just really fast, of course, the shameless plug for the amazing work that a bunch of people that are on this call right now have contributed to in the myriad of resources that are available on the Gala Choruses website. If you haven't been on recently, a lot of the resources have been updated, specifically, for COVID and things like these, things like this. Jane, I know you do a lot more of work on these kinds of things. Do you have anything that you wanted to say about resources that are coming up?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you're going to cover a lot of it here.
Cool.
I just realized I was sort of working with my mic, but did the two of you introduce yourselves? Because I realized I didn't.
No, and I was actually just about to say, because we're here. No. So let's actually, let's round table. And Maria Elena, how about you start? And everybody that's on the call that's a committee member or committee adjacent, give a little shout out real fast.
Okay, great. So I am Maria Elena Grant. I am a member of Lavender Light Gospel Choir in New York City. The choir is almost 30 years old at this point, and I've been a member for 28. I sit on the Gala Choruses Board of Directors, and I'm a member of the New Harmony Task Force.
And I'm Jane Ramsire Miller. I conduct One Voice Mixed Chorus in Minnesota, and I serve as Gala's Artistic Director.
I'm Sam Bullington. I'm the founder and director of Phoenix, Colorado's Trans Community Choir, and I've been on this committee since January 2016.
I'm Reed Vanderberg. I'm a baritone with the Portland Gay Men's Chorus, and before that I sang with Confluence, and before that I sang with the Portland Lesbian Choir. I've been on this committee, I think, from the beginning, but I wouldn't swear to that. 2016 sounds about right.
And our newest member, Anthony.
And I'm Anthony Cabrera. I'm the artistic director of the Miami Gay Men's Chorus, and I joined this committee last week.
And it was an amazing addition, and we are really, really happy that you are with us. So now you have a little idea of who we are. Thanks, Jane, for that. We just kind of thought everybody knew. We're going to get back into the workbook. And as I said, when we were talking about it at Open Table, and then we renamed ourselves recently to New Harmony Task Force, it was, what were the kind of issues that we wanted to tackle when we were talking about equity, access, and belonging? And we broke it down eventually into the categories of mobility and ability, race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic access, and community engagement. And that, by no means, covered everything that needed to be discussed. And we, in fact, have new topics that we want to develop in our second issue of this workbook, which will deal with mental health and neurodiversity, intergenerational dynamics, and diverse relationships. But we started with the first group because we needed somewhere to start and get the work done and get the conversations going. And the way that the workbook is divided up is that we have scenarios that were actually real scenarios from choruses, that they had talked about problems that they had been having around these areas. So it wasn't theoretical, the stories that we were talking about. We would then describe what the problem might be, we would come up with guidelines for how people could have discussions about these topics in their course, and then a checklist of how they would be doing the work. And so, as you can see, William has put up, using the workbook with discussion guidelines, using real scenarios, creating action steps, customizing the plan to fit your circumstances and experiences. And that we also found that sometimes with discussions like this, it was best to have a small group. So, assessing chorus harmony. Just want to slip this over a little bit. Can I get the next slide?
Oh, yeah. Hey, Sam, just shout stuff like that out. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Oh, no, sorry.
Because I know we have about half of us on the phone, is that one of the new sections is going to be about religion. And I think we talk about that later.
Right. I'm also trying to look at the chat at the same time. So
I got you covered.
Could you
guys go ahead?
That? Thanks. All right. So in terms of assessing chorus harmony, I'm just pushing, because all of us seem to be blocking my screen, so I'm pushing our faces to the left. You're trying to figure out what the goal is for the discussion. You're talking about things like who are we, what are our organization's values, and what is the organization currently doing to provide access. And the reason that that matters is you need to be clear about why you want to have these discussions. And one of the things that we had talked about early on is that if in assessing your chorus's goals and addressing who you were, if you were fine with that, if you really felt that your mission statement still filled the work that you were supposed to be doing, and that you were reaching the community and the audiences, and you had the chorus makeup that you had strived for and wanted to continue striving for, then that was fine. You know, it wasn't like you had to take on this work and just make yourself change for the sake of change. In fact, that wouldn't be authentic, and it just wouldn't work. So, so it was important that you would have to assess the situation to decide what it was you wanted to change before you could begin doing the work. Opening a dialogue. Again, I cannot see. All right, William, you jump in there, please.
Sure. So this is basically the workbook, and there are, 5 basically different reiterations that look just like this. So each section has the clearly labeled title, and then some sort of preparation, and that might be a short blog post or a video. We tried to make them resources that would be free and available online as much as we could. So it's something for the participants and the facilitator to do in advance of coming to the meeting. The facilitation. How do you do this? It does work best in groups of 4 to 5. It can work up to 7 or 8, past 8 into 10. That's probably a few too many. And then, what are some of the things to look for? Some of the different sections do have checklists or additional materials to distribute to participants. So it's just got some notes there. And then introduction. Some people have not had any exposure to some of the concerns that are raised in this book at all. And so there's just as briefly and as tightly compact as we could make it, we tried to give a short overview of the topic matter and the subject matter. And these will probably need to get updated over the years as things evolve. But it's a good snapshot of here and now. How are we thinking about these things? And then we have these scenarios. So again, these are coming from real choruses. And this version of the sheet is what it looks like for the photocopy for participants. And here you'll see scenarios for discussion. These, and like we said, these are real things that really happened. You'll see some sections have a couple, other sections have more, and they're very complicated. And they're very complicated on purpose because they don't have a right answer a lot of the times. A lot of times, these are the kinds of questions that we really do see in our spaces that are complex, and it's about determining the best, sometimes compromise, or determining the best course of action. And we're going to talk about how to do that, because the purpose of this work is to figure out how to make the right decision. All right. So then after this is still for the facilitator, we've got a little bit about what's the problem. So again, if you have no background in these kinds of topics, we wanted to give you a little bit of an insight, to encourage the work. So, here are some things you might look at as problematic in the scenarios that we described. And then finally wrapping up with or concluding with possible action steps. Because the most important thing about doing work like this is that there be actual action at the end of the process. So whether that's reviewing existing policies and procedures and changing them, eliminating them, or implementing new policies and procedures to correct, modify, adjust, or just optimize the things that are already going on in your organization to provide better access, right? So having an action plan and then following up on that action plan, make sure that not only are people's voices heard, meaning the sounds of their voice, but we need their voices heard in terms of action to change our organizations. So that's how the actual book sort of functions. So now let me pass the ball to one of my very skilled facilitators.
Well, that would be Reed. Reed, you pick it up now.
Okay. So when you're facilitating these kinds of conversations, you have to give time for introductions. You have to establish community agreements of respect. Part of that would be asking preferred name and pronouns around gender identity. Next slide, please. And listen more than you talk. It's very easy for facilitators, especially if it's a topic that you are very familiar with, to just not exactly get on your high horse, but to just start talking without it really realizing that you've taken over the conversation. This is much more about facilitating the group participants in talking. That said, it's also a time for allowing awkward silence because the topics we're bringing up here are difficult to talk about, some of them. When we're talking about race or disability or gender identity, there's a lot of people that will be uncomfortable with these topics. So we have to allow time to let that silence be and not just jump in, because in this culture, we're really uncomfortable with the idea of just sitting in the silence. It's a difficult thing to do. That said, you have to distinguish between the uncomfortable and what's actually rude. Like, what does that mean? Or instead of saying it like that, what do you mean by that? And take it seriously. Would you clarify what you meant by that? Because these are difficult things to talk about, and many people don't have the language, and they kind of stumble over their words, and they might say something that's offensive, and it's really easy to get offended and take it in that direction when in fact they didn't actually mean it that way, or they don't know that they said something offensive. So clarification is an important part of this process. So next slide. Facilitator self-care. Yes, take deep breaths, stay centered. Having two facilitators can be a good idea. Confidentiality and courtesy, that's another piece of this. Next slide, please. Conversations work best in small groups. Yes. If you have a large group, and especially if you're doing these things by Zoom, which for some time to come we might be, I've been facilitating a number of types of conversations recently, and what I've discovered is that it doesn't work so well if all the pictures of the people don't fit on one screen. If it spills onto the next screen, I can't see who's talking, I can't see who looks uncomfortable, I can't see somebody raising their hand. It's much harder to moderate. On my particular screen, 9 or 10 is about the max I can handle. Serve food? Well, yes, if you are in person, certainly serve food. If you're not, then make sure you've eaten well, all of you, and maybe have a little bit of time to say what you had to eat as an icebreaker. Allowing enough time, you can't pack all of this kind of discussion into 1 hour. So you can't think that you can get all of this work done in one conversation to begin with. But if you only have an hour, just pick one thing to talk about. And if you start going deep into something, just because you don't get to the rest of your agenda, that's fine. Schedule another meeting. Keep the conversation going and don't cut people off. And be supportive and open. That is one of the key things. We are all in this work to try to do well by our choruses, to try to be better people, to try to interact better, to really live our interconnections with each other. So being supportive and open of people's process is really key. Next slide. Okay, these are real-life examples from Gala choruses. I wrote some of these. I wrote the ones for the section on disability. These things happened to people that I know. Participants may have strong reactions to conversations. Of course they will. These are difficult topics to talk about. There may be disagreement or argument, disagreement about what's the best direction to take these conversations, what kinds of solutions might work best for each chorus. Keep on disagreeing, keep on talking, try to articulate the other person's point of view, even if you disagree with it, and see if maybe you come to some form of consensus around something that neither one of you thought of before. But keep the conversation going. That is the main thing.
So we've got Winston Harrell had a hand up, and I just wanted to give them a chance really fast to come on and ask their question if that was something they wanted to do. Okay, we'll push ahead.
Unmute. Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
There we go. No,
here.
great. Hey.
Yeah, here I am. Hi. I work at a. I work as a activity leader for Tempe Day Center in Mesa, Arizona. Well, actually Tempe. And my thing is I would like to facilitate more conversations about sexual gender, race equality, and even have some activities that would include actual physical things that we could do actually to help build team members, team development inside our choir. We have a lot of cliques that are in our choir, and I would like to maybe possibly do different role plays where people can actually physically get involved in things that are going on and helping people to understand why these types of issues are coming up.
I have a comment about that. It's something I've noticed with Zoom. This has happened at my church, for example. Afterwards, we have coffee hour, and we send people into breakout rooms, and they are random. So you don't end up with your clique. You end up with people that maybe you've never met before, and you can have...
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you can have guided conversations so that they have specific topics to talk about, perhaps some of the things that have divided people into cliques, whatever those might be. So that's one solution that's really pertinent to Zoom, is to have the breakout room that's randomly assigned.
Okay, sounds good to me.
I was going to say, does that fully answer your question, Winston?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Moving ahead, creating transformative change.
Okay. You would be developing specific action steps for each conversation. I mean, this is what we were saying too in terms of what we just said in terms of breakout rooms. You could actually have people in breakout rooms at specific topics that you focus on. Action steps should be actionable and achievable. It's important that when you're talking about making actual change within your organization, it's something you can do. Because if you start having a conversation and then you can't achieve anything that you've laid out, then that actually creates a different problem, right? You're not only not transforming change, but you're depressing the group because you're like, oh, how come we weren't able to get all these things done? So it should be actionable and achievable, and encourage formation of a standing access committee. We put as a reminder, fostering belonging is a practice, not a goal. It's the same reason that we did away with the word diversity in our work. We didn't want it to be a checklist. It's like fostering belonging. You're chipping away at it. It's work that is never, ever really done. It's a goal that you would like to aspire to, but it's very dangerous to put yourself in a mode where you feel, oh, we've achieved it. Now we have no other work to do. And one of the ways that you can make sure that the work keeps going is if you have a standing committee that is actually looking at these issues on a regular basis and tweaking ways that work can be done with the chorus. Next slide, please. Checklists and guides. Again, we want to be able to have conversations so that we can make plans and do good work, and we don't want it to be so clinical again. So on the one hand, when I say you can't just check off diversity, you can't just check off access and belonging and your work is done. On the other hand, ironically, you do need a checklist to keep track of the work that you're doing. It's just a tool so that you can keep order. And so checklists and guides, if you had the Standing Access Committee, this would be something that they would be using to make sure that they had set themselves goals for the issues that they wanted to address. They were then going down their list and making sure that they had taken care of all of those items. It's just really a way to keep order, not a way to have a narrow, stifled conversation. Next slide. Additional conversation starters. There is always more to consider. So you have one goal. You set out, you say, I think this is the thing that the chorus needs to be focusing on, and then you start to talk about it, and someone else raises their hand in the middle of the conversation and says, well, what about this? And so you always have to consider that there is much more than what you're looking at in that moment. And readings and videos for sparking conversations and dialogue is also helpful because you're going into difficult topics, and sometimes it's hard for people to just start talking about these things off the bat. So you have readings that they could do before they come to the meeting, videos that they can watch, even if you watch them together, then it's a good way to get the conversation going. Next slide.
Maria Elena, maybe I'll just add that the previous slide showed the end of the workbook. There's a whole list for every topic of resources that you can go to if you want to explore that further.
Thank you very much, Jane. And here are further links for the work that we've been talking about. Again, you see here that we talk about mobility and ability, race and ethnic identity, gender identity, and sexual orientation. We're bringing your attention here to the New Harmony website, where there are lots of resources that you guys can use after this meeting and for the rest of your choral lives, actually, if you think about it that way. And now we are here at time for Q&A. So we are opening the floor. All the committee members will participate.
And you can either put your question in the chat and I'll kind of look for those, or raise your hand, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, Jane is keeping track of that. So the floor is open. Please, please, please ask us questions.
I just have one question. I've taken the liberty of having some discussions with some of our members, mostly previous members of color that have not, that have decided to withdraw from our chorus. And I really would like to discover why. You know, I've been asking questions. So 2/3 of our members are men of color and transgender. They have not returned to our chorus. So I'm trying to discover what the reason is. And we've had some pretty candid discussions on what they felt the reason was and how they felt about how things were going, and it's all across the board. Reason wise, you know, some people didn't feel comfortable with the schedule. Other people didn't feel comfortable with, you know, maybe they thought it was one thing, and then once we get into the choir rehearsal sessions and rehearsals and music and all that, they may have felt it was one way. A couple of people that was transgender said that they felt that our chorus did not represent people of transgender in a positive light. So my thing is, not only do I want to discover why these things are happening, but I want to make sure that everybody has a safe place where they can discuss these issues and in open, candid conversation. I'm like, you know, you need to say what you feel. This is not the time to hide your feelings. You need to be honest and upfront and say, look, you know, I didn't like this. I didn't like that. This person didn't treat me like this. That person treated me this way. And I guess one of the things that I really wanted to know is, like, I know you guys seem to have it very organized, which is a good thing, because I have some ideas that I think will work for our group. And it's always good to get input from other people that are doing things all over the country regarding race and gender and different problems that you'll have. I haven't really said anything up until this point. Because of everything that's going on in the country right now, I think it's really important that we have open conversations and we actually are talking about things that are going on right now. Right now we only really have 5 members, 5 African American members. We have a few people that are Asian, and we have a few people that are Latino. But and we every year we keep losing members, and it's very disheartening.
Well, thank you. I will say this. It only seems neat and tidy because we put it between 2 covers and made a book. But it's actually very messy. It's very messy, right?
Okay.
So we put it in a book to say this is really immense and it can be overwhelming. And we kind of want to make a workbook to guide people in the direction that they would like to go. And so I think that with everything that you have laid out, maybe, and again, this is a guide. It's like, obviously, you will figure out what is best for you. But as a guide for what you might think about, it is perhaps looking at the whole landscape of all of the changes that you think are happening in the chorus and all of the people that have left. And then you might pick up one piece of it. You might say, I really want to get to the bottom of why all of the people of color have left. And you might talk to some other people in your chorus and say, could we do some outreach? See if we could have conversations with these people about why they've left. If you are in the chorus and you feel someone is withdrawing and they're about to leave, is there a way that you can have a conversation with them so that even if they go out the door, it's almost a bit like an exit interview. Like, you kind of want to get to the bottom of the reason why, and there's no way that you could possibly know. All you're seeing is the result that the people are leaving. And so it's like taking a piece that you want to look at, say, what is the piece of this problem? I'm going to pick up one piece, right? So that, again, is where we spoke earlier about making sure that you're setting goals that are achievable. You're one person. You can't take it all on at once, but maybe you could pick up one piece. You could turn to someone else in your chorus and say, will you be my buddy in this? This is really bothering me. Is it bothering you too? They say, absolutely. I've been thinking about that as well. Great. Let's figure out this one piece. Either we're doing outreach to members that have left, or let's try to preserve the people that are with us right now. And if you take like a little piece, then that's the way you start to build on your progress, is what I think.
There's another thing to address here is the piece about the trans people that have left or felt like they weren't comfortable. That's a piece that people need a lot of education around. And as a trans person, I do a lot of that education, but I know a lot of trans people don't want to do that. They just want to come and sing. But if they feel disrespected or misunderstood or something, they get disheartened easily and they might leave. So bringing someone in who knows about trans issues, who can do some education, it might open your eyes a little bit more so that you would understand maybe on your own, excuse me, why some of those people left. And then you can have a conversation with them and they'll see that you're coming from a place of having sought education so that they don't have to feel like they are everyone's education on trans issues, because that's something that comes up a lot for trans people, to feel like they're responsible for educating everyone around them.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll put some links to those pages that William was describing that are a really good place to start, some really good video resources. We have some excellent questions, and I'm going to try to put them together. But this one question is sort of, how do you measure whether you're making progress? How do you know if you're making the right decisions? How did you decide which direction you're going? Some big, big questions. Who wants to take that one?
All right, I'll jump in. Since everyone's looking at me, I'm not sure that I completely know the answer. Also, part of that question was, what if everyone agrees, but there's still a risk of harm with the decisions that you're making? I mean, I think that's a big piece of it. So in terms of how do you know you're going in the right direction, you're deciding as a group the direction that you want to go in, right? You guys you're having these discussions and you're making decisions, and maybe you've gone back to your mission statement and you feel the mission needs to be tweaked a little. Maybe you're looking at your vision statement that you had, and maybe you're looking at that a little. And then you kind of decide as a group that you're going to move forward. And you know that you're starting to make progress because you'll start to see it. And if you feel like you're not making progress, then it means that you're needing to have another conversation. I mean, that's the thing that we're saying. This doesn't get wrapped up in an hour. You kind of say, okay, this is what we're going to do, let's go forward. It's like you can try one direction, everybody agrees that the way it's going to go, you're not getting the returns that you were looking for, you think you need to be making different progress, then you need to just come back to the drawing board and have another conversation, or look at the steps that you have taken and see if there's any piece that you missed along the way. And I know someone else had put a question in there, I think, about metrics. This is something that we actually talk about even with the workbook, with the Gala workbook, that we want to actually this year start looking for metrics. Our metrics will be how many choruses are using the workbook, having them report back to us on the things that are working. We're also very interested in hearing if there are ways they've used the workbook and they feel that it didn't work. That's also going to be valuable for us as we get ready to create a second edition to make sure that we are moving on the right path. But I just think in terms of if you're doing the right thing or not, you step forward, you see how it starts to work for you. If it's not working the way that you want, then you take a step back, you look at it again, and then you step forward again.
There are also ways to find allies in your community to just sort of check in with, like an advisory committee, and say it might be communities of color, it might be a community or a few people with disabilities, whatever it is that you're working on, to respectfully ask for their help, to review what your plan is and see if they have suggestions, if they think that there would be barriers or this might be effective. One person in the chat asked, are these scenarios just for singers? No, they're for everybody. And in fact, probably it's helpful. I mean, it depends on your chorus, but it might be helpful to start with your staff and board or leadership team, and then broaden out to the rest of your singers. Althea asked, how do you bring along or encourage reluctant members? That's a really good question. Can we throw that one out to whoever has some thoughts?
I'll say something on that, and maybe it's a different take or unpopular take, but I feel like, so often we feel like we have to kind of, get a lot of buy-in and kind of tiptoe around and convince people of these issues. And I feel like the situation that's happening in the world now is just like, this is non-optional. Like, we need to deal with this. And I feel like taking a leadership role and just being like, the tone of the culture has shifted, and to really utilize this moment to really have difficult conversations and to start them, because a lot of people are afraid of having them because either they've gone badly in the past or they don't know how to start them. To me, it just feels like, this is non-optional curriculum for us as a people right now.
I just want to say that there's a lot of social psychological research which suggests that you change people's attitudes by changing their actions first, not the other way around. And I think there's been this kind of effort, which is let's change people's attitudes and then they'll start acting differently. And actually, we have to start encouraging people to act differently before their attitudes are totally on board and before attitudes have completely changed. And that's why we can all enter the picture and sort of come out new, because we're different with each group and we behave differently and we engage differently, and it helps us all kind of develop our attitudes. So I think there's a kind of risk in thinking we have to wait for people to have a certain attitude or for them to express a certain level of readiness, instead of creating inclusive opportunities that allow people to be whoever they are and act new, have opportunities to act new, and then that gives them a sort of way to reflect and think differently and discover new attitudes.
I've certainly noticed that happens when you start to open up bathrooms and make them be gender neutral and whatnot. If you do that at a conference and you paste a sign over all the bathroom doors that says open to everyone, there's a lot of discomfort at first, and then people start to get used to it. So I think you're right that if you change behavior, that can help change attitudes.
I think it's...
Go ahead, Marilyn.
I think it's an excellent point that Barbara's making too, because the question that was earlier in the chat about when you're picking the direction you want to go in and if it causes harm, right? So it could be that as you're starting to make the change, if people were not quite ready as you're moving along, it's like, make sure that you don't get discouraged by that. You know, it's like they will catch up. And part of the reason that people end up catching up or not is if the chorus means the world to them. It's their community and they want to work hard to preserve it. And sometimes it's tough and sometimes it's not exactly on their timetable. So I think that's an excellent point that Barbara's making. And that's the work. Right. And that's the constant check-in. That's the, okay, we stepped to the left and we thought the whole room would go to the left, but 5 people are still over here. And maybe we have to keep stepping to the left and eventually they'll catch up with us. So thanks, Barbara, for that. Go ahead, Jane. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. Barbara, your comment also reminded me that when, for example, when my chorus and within Gala choruses started trying to create spaces to make sure that we had spaces of belonging for trans and non-binary people, a lot of what we did was storytelling, like making sure that trans and non-binary people's stories were present and visible. And that also really, really changes people's hearts and understanding. And, you know, I'm thinking of Winston, your comment too. Maybe we look within our choruses for people that need to just share their stories as a way of centering those people and those experiences, but having us feel those things in our heart and not just our heads.
Right, exactly. Danny has said, it's hard to have open conversations without people having feelings about what others say. I like the idea of starting conversations with the community meeting agreements to help set the stage for a safe space to talk. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like people talk and you have feelings. You have feelings about what this panel is saying tonight. And therefore, because we're clear that this is an open and safe space, we can express how we feel and be honest about it and move forward. But yes, you definitely need to set those ground rules if you're going to be able to have productive conversations. And someone also offered to Winston's question, they said, my chorus has a member at large. This person's primary role is to listen to one-on-one to members that have issues that need to be addressed and present them to our board. If that member prefers, the MIA will present the issue without naming the person who first presented the issue. So that's another way to do it, is you could have one person that people know that they go to, sort of like a member at large, an ombuds.
Yes.
That would be another way to do it, right?
Yes.
And
because I think one of the things that sometimes the members feel a little intimidated by the person that they're talking to. And it might be that the person that they have a problem with is maybe the vice president or the executive director or their section leader. So they feel like they don't want to open up and say anything, but they might say something to somebody that, you know, is sitting next to them and have been sitting next to them that whole season. I have approached a lot of our members, you know, the new ones and the older ones, and I've initiated conversations. How do you feel about being a member? How do you feel about the music? How do you feel about the dress rehearsals? All these questions I'm asking, you know, and people have basically, you know, they've been fairly honest about their responses and saying, well, you know, I like this part, I don't like that part, you know. But if it's somebody that's in the governance council, they're less reluctant to voice their opinion.
Well, I just want to jump in and say, I'm sorry. I just want to jump in and say your chorus is incredibly lucky to have someone who is so focused on ensuring that the members have a good experience. What an incredible asset. We could all be so lucky. So,
well said. Well said. Pax has written, yeah, I'd like to follow up on Winston's question after the others in the queue. Pax?
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, great. Yeah, just when hearing Winston's question, my ears perked up because I am Black and transgender, and I've certainly felt welcome in my own chorus. I actually transitioned while in the chorus, and I feel very accepted there. I'm personally more connected with the transgender community than the Black community. I live in San Francisco, and we're obviously a very queer-friendly community. The issue that I've had is that in the total of 5 years I've been in the chorus, I've been the only Black singer, with the exception of someone who joined and then had to leave a couple of weeks later, not because he was dissatisfied with the chorus, but for work reasons. And so it's not like I can interview Black people who have left, because there aren't any, you know, and I've been, you know, working through that, and I've been, you know, just as I said, I don't feel unwelcome as a Black person at all, but it is something that I'm aware of. And I also wanted to make the point, especially during this time of heightened awareness for Black Lives Matter, that Black and people of color are not interchangeable terms. I mean, everybody who is not white is certainly affected by white supremacy, but Black folks have different challenges. And that's part of how I'm trying to figure out, not only as a singer, but also as a board member of my chorus, how to address the question of why no Black folks in particular have joined our chorus, although we have certainly had other people of color. So that's all I wanted to say, I guess.
Thank you, Pat. No, I think that that the point that you're making is huge, right? It's the point. It's key that right now we are in a moment where Black Lives Matter, and that message need not be diluted. It happened once before. They said Black Lives Matter, and someone quickly said all lives matter, and right away it went out the window, and that was not the conversation. And so I think that at the task force, we meet once a month and we talk about different things to do with our workbook and our courses at large. It is that these type of discussions need to be had in an uncompromising manner, and that's the work. And so if there's anywhere that this workbook can start to be helpful now, whether it be for trans issues or Black issues or whatever it is that people are looking at, now more than ever, you need guidelines so that you can have these really hard conversations and not go off course. Because it's very easy for somebody to swoop in and say, no, and just change the scenery and be like, I know you want to talk about how you feel, Maria Elena, as a Black lesbian in this world, but what we really need to talk about is if we're having pizza after rehearsal. And it's like, no, actually, we need to talk about my Blackness and my gayness, and I already ate before I got to rehearsal. So it's like you have to be focused. It has to be like you zero right in on what you're talking about, and it's tough, and that's why we need each other, and that's why we need these safe spaces so that we can have such conversations. And even when someone's saying something that feels scary to me, or I'm not sure, if that's my fellow chorus member and this is our one community that we've built, then I have to put on my armor and I have to take those slings and arrows and be willing to work forward. This is exactly the time for that. Thank you, Pax.
We have a ton of
we have a ton of chats.
I'll try to sort of weed through and connect them, but
okay.
Do you feel like we covered well enough the one about how to get folks on board? I mean, I think we've addressed it somewhat. One of the things that struck me was my chorus started out in our schools program 20 years ago, and we have a huge participation from the chorus because it was actually their idea to do it. And it just struck me that hopefully if you're working on this process and creating your action steps as a community, as opposed to, your board does it, but the singers are involved in creating what these action steps look like, my hope is that maybe there's more investment that way. And you bring people along because you're working with their ideas. Jules, sorry. For those that want to be allies, are interested in doing the heart work and gaining some very useful skills. Jules suggested a link here if you are interested. It's another workshop. And Michael says they were in the New Harmony workshop last year. One thing I got is that the board and singers should always be in on these conversations because it's important to hear from everyone. Yeah, that's about buy-in too. As we work on the booklet, is there a communication link to ask questions? Ooh, that's a great question. I'm wondering, William, if you should be our communication link as our 411 community engagement advisor, and then you could bring it to the New Harmony committee. Would that make sense?
I think that is a perfect role for the position to have, point person.
Yeah. Maybe I'll add a link to William's email on that webpage. Thank you. That's a great idea.
Great idea. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Who that was. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to read as fast as I can. If anyone else wants to jump in, feel free.
Well, I found one. I'm not going in order, so Jane, you can continue to go in order.
Okay.
But I saw one, and I'm probably going to mispronounce, but I'm going to try. Keegan had a terrific question. How do you recommend differentiating for large choruses? Sam, do you have thoughts on this? I see you nodding your head because I don't have thoughts. I just thought it was a great question.
Yeah, no, I love when you have people who are just encountering this for the first time, and then you have a bunch of people who have already had 101 stuff, then, how can you keep everybody engaged at a level where they're continuing to grow? I'm very curious to hear what other people think about this. One thing that occurred to me was it could be interesting, like at a choral retreat, to have kind of a 101 workshop and a 201 workshop kind of happening simultaneously for people who are wanting to engage with the issues differently, to keep everybody engaged.
I also think, you could have the two different workshops concurrently, but also at some point, I think part of what we're talking about here tonight is that the work is never done. So it's not really like a member says, well, I don't need to go to that anymore because I completely understand everything fully and there's nothing more that I can learn. So I think probably part of the challenge is helping them keep open to the fact that it's an ongoing journey, that it doesn't really end, so that they can be open to continuing to grow together. It's a tricky one, though, because you do have some people who say, been there, done that, I don't need to talk about that anymore. Jane, what did you come to in the questions?
Al has a question, and someone else was asking, are we going to get a copy of this? And yes, we will have a recording, this recorded, and it'll be posted on the same website. So Terrell, what's your question?
Hi, I am with the Greensboro Triad Pride's Men's Chorus, and my question is, we're just kind of working with our women's chorus here to put together a diversity group. My main concern for me is we have had a huge influx of women in our chorus who seem to be very engaged in activities of, bringing up conversations of diversity. But when it comes to the men's chorus, we have a hard time getting them involved. In particular, it's kind of, I think Reed brought this up before, about trans people just wanting to sing, but these are just kind of like gay guys who want to come and sing. So I guess I'm trying to figure out a way to maybe help shift the perspective and help broaden the male chorus perspective so I can get more engagement from them, because we have our numbers have been pretty stagnant. We don't grow a lot, and I'm one of 3 minorities in our group, and that's a pretty high for how long I've been in there. So how to have those conversations would be great, if that makes sense.
It does, but I don't want to be the first one to jump in. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so could somebody else pick this up, please?
Hey, Terrell, not me. He's one of mine. So somebody else take this one.
Well, yeah, having sung in a lesbian chorus and a gay men's chorus, I do understand a lot about the dynamic differences here. And the reason I hesitated to jump in is because I could talk for hours about this.
Please.
But yeah, you will find that the women seem to be quicker to be on board around social justice issues. That's been my experience. With the men, it can be harder to get them to realize, because what I've noticed is that that's especially true with the white cisgender gay men. Not so much with the men of color, not so much with the trans men who identify as gay, but with the white cisgender gay men, it can be difficult to get them to see that there's something to talk about. And that's the hard part. The conversations, people telling their stories, what Jane was saying earlier, that's how you can really reach people, is through the heart. So that if they hear the stories and then they start to see the problems, because otherwise they're not going to see them on their own. So if you can bring people in that will tell their stories, or if you have chorus members who are willing to share something about themselves that maybe the rest of the chorus doesn't know, something breaks through that barrier so that they start to see that there are other points of view that they had not considered before. It's really hard when you're talking about lesbians talking to gay men and gay men talking to lesbians. I have been in that room before on both sides of that fence. There's a gender divide there that can be really hard to bridge. But I'll tell you, trans people I am that bridge. And that's a label I claim for myself. I am the bridge between those two. So bringing someone like me into the room could also help. So I'm not going to talk any more about this because, like I said, I could talk the whole rest of this time about it.
Reed, can I ask you a question about that? Because I know, at least for our members who were active during the AIDS crisis, that there was a lot of dialogue at that time. about lesbians standing with gay men and taking care of gay men with regards to AIDS. And I'm wondering if using that kind of analogy of talking about, there are people who need to have people stand with them right now to try to encourage people and reference kind of how people did that for gay men during the 80s, if that would be a useful way to help awaken their hearts.
Well, when I think back to that time period, that was when I was part of lesbian community. And in my experience, it was really, among the lesbians I knew, it was a handful who stood with the gay men and were really allies to the gay men. But the rest, we were like, that's their problem. And, I kind of hate to say that, but that was an attitude that I heard expressed a lot among lesbians. But yes, we all need to be better allies to each other, because every community in that big, long acronym has its own challenges. And learning about each other's challenges and standing up for each other is a key part of this work.
So Triad Pride, you have two choruses. I'm wondering, Terrell, if you've tried putting the choruses together to have this conversation. I just really value mixing all the genders because I think what comes out of that is a different kind of conversation.
We've had those kind of conversations, and we've had smaller versions of those, but the way I frame them as a Black queer male, I've been told that they are too political at times. So that has also been a barrier that I've been trying to get through with some of the leadership in the choruses, which thankfully this moment in, we're living through right now has helped that conversation further a lot. So we haven't had a chance to try it again since this, but it seems to be moving in that direction where we can have those bigger conversations and bring in broader back stories.
Another person asked about whether Gala has facilitators. Well, two questions. One is, are we as a committee recommending bringing in a facilitator to use this workbook or not? And then does Gala have facilitators? And maybe I'll answer the second question and then pass the first. We actually talked a number of weeks ago about creating a list of recommended facilitators that can come in, and that hasn't been done yet. So I'm going to make sure that is on our list and happens because it's a really great idea.
And I think to the second question, do we recommend bringing in outside facilitators? I would. I mean, I think that you could bring in an outside facilitator. You could have them use the workbook as a basis to get the conversation started. I think if you're going to bring in somebody from outside, you need to be taking a lot of time to get them up to speed, to understand the group that they're talking to, make sure that they're clear about the mission. They might come in and have a conversation. If you have a board, they might come and visit with the board one night and talk to them and get their opinions. They might have a night where they come and sit with the singers and get their opinions. But the reason I think it's good to have somebody from the outside is you need somebody who has distance from the conversation. It's like you all need to speak with each other in a very real way. And you need that person to be able to guide all of you. You need that person to be the keeper of the ground rules, for instance. It'll be one thing if one person says something and another person cuts them off, and then a third member of the chorus tries to intervene. It's like that would be a disaster, I think. So it's helpful to have outside people, but make sure that you bring them up to speed and they're really clear about what they're coming in to facilitate.
And this committee has done some of that in the past.
I was just going to say the other piece of that is that if you have someone from within the chorus facilitating, they don't have a voice in the conversation then because they are then a facilitator and their point of view, their perspective isn't represented.
And to answer Courtney's question, yes, I'm willing to be a facilitator. Oh, that's what she said. She said, our panelists available or willing, working from home. I'm here. I'm willing. Would love to.
I was just going to add that part of the design of this particular workbook is that it can be done without a facilitator if you don't have the money, because facilitators can be really, really expensive. So we didn't want that to be a barrier. So I think the cautions that this team has sort of described in terms of having a designated facilitator or two are really important if you want to do it on your own. I was also in a meeting last night with my leadership team for my own chorus, and one of them is a professional consultant, and she listed some kind of statistic for when consultants go in and work with nonprofits. It's a tiny, tiny percentage that actually follow through long term. You know, like in 3 or 5 years, they're actually still following what they worked on. And it was shocking to me. So I just think as you're creating action steps with or without a facilitator, to really make them steps that you can integrate and significantly make change in your chorus. Keep them small enough that you can have success in those areas.
And also, just to defend myself so I don't look shady, I didn't really say anything about money, but it's okay. I do not want people to come away from this like, oh, and Maria Elena decided to make a buck on the side. That was not what I meant. But I'm certainly into helping with conversations like this if I'm able. I think that was my eagerness to help.
So we have maybe 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I think about 5 more minutes. Did we hit all the questions? Did we really?
Unless I missed one, I think we did.
Right.
And I will also make sure, I guess William will make sure that the chat is recorded and posted so you can all.
I wanted to circle back to Terrell's question real quick and kind of offer something that really worked in my process as the artistic director of a group. As I was looking for people to want to engage in conversation, is that rather than scheduling a meeting to talk about these things, that as I planned my rehearsal, I made a deliberate effort. It was part of my rehearsal plan to talk about this particular social justice issue for the next 3 weeks, whether it was we were addressing it through music or whatever, but it was a deliberate attempt to engage people over a period of time. And then it became a lot more comfortable to say to people, we're going to get together for a Saturday workshop, and this is what we're going to talk about. And then I ended up having more people rather than trying it the other way. So really kind of threading that conversation through the rehearsal process for a number of weeks, and it might be an entire semester, and then getting to the point where over time people have had this subject matter, this conversation as part of their regular engagement with the chorus, such that it gets them to the point where now they want to engage in it as individuals. And of course, you know, you're not going to get everyone in your chorus to come and talk about these things, but if you kind of weave it over time, you're going to develop a core group of people that are going to want to join in that conversation.
I like that. That's
my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I think we're going to start to wind down a little bit here. I think that this has been a terrific conversation. We're so glad that you joined us this evening. We hope that we helped answer some of your questions. You certainly gave us a lot to think about. As we have said all along, this is just not a one-time thing. You know, I think the task force is very interested in continuing to have conversations like this throughout the summer. And so we will be scheduling other gatherings. Sometimes it will be about the workbook. Sometimes it'll be about other topics. But we hope that you will join us because we love each other and we're a fierce task force, but we can't always just be talking to ourselves. And so it's great if we can commune with you. It's a wonderful thing. Sam, could I ask you to help us close with a closing breath, perhaps? Just to center ourselves and go on our way? Seems like that.
Yeah, sure. So if you just want to turn your attention within, this is a really, really valuable conversation. So just really allow everything that you heard and everything that arose in you to just integrate. Just breathe it in. If there's anything in particular that really struck you, maybe just 1 or 2 takeaways that you just really want to remind yourself, or that really felt like the right next action step for you, just allow that to come to a place of priority in your imagination. So you hang on to that. Yeah, when a refill ready, bring your attention back to your breath. Just allow yourself to come back to your surroundings and to our virtual roommate.
So one of the things we find is when we're done with this, it's hard to say goodnight, but we're actually going to do that. We tend to want to sit in the room, but we also need to be on our way. So thank you so much again for joining us. To all of my fellow task force members, could not get this amazing work done without you all. Love you and admire you all so much. And we'll see you soon. Okay, guys, be well.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.